Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back from lunch and a great awards ceremony. Welcome to VMI and Lexington, to all the newcomers who came in over lunch period. I'm Colonel Dave Gray. I'm the director here at the Center for Leadership and Ethics. I'll be your master of ceremonies for the next couple days. Now, we already kicked off sort of the informal beginning of the conference with a great awards ceremony for those folks who've been working hard, even under COVID conditions, to protect our environment and do great things for the Commonwealth of Virginia. Now we're going to kind of kick into the first formal session of the conference. And that will be with the regulatory updates from the Department of Environmental Quality, things that I know all of you are very interested in. After today's panel, a couple things will happen. First, there'll be our first round of breakout sessions, and those will begin at 3:45, and then the fun stuff starts at 5 o'clock. So a reception and networking after 5 o'clock. So I want to kick this off quickly, and I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator for today's session on the regulatory updates, Mr. Jim Steers, Director of Central Operations at DEQ, will serve as that moderator. Sir, I turn the podium to you.
Thank you, Colonel. And it's good to be back in person. We enjoyed the interaction with folks. I know at DEQ we're coming back into the office more now, so it's great to see all these faces, and we hope we can provide you some good information today. The way we're going to run this panel is we'll have a series of presentations, and then we're going to save questions for the end, and then we'll ask that if you have a question to come up to one of the mics on either side of the stage to ask your question, and then we'll be happy to answer them, and hopefully you'll have a lot of good questions. So we're going to start out, in our panel today is Director Rolband, and then Mike Dowd on the far end, our Air Division Director, Melanie Davenport, our Water Permitting Division Director, Jutta Schneider at the end, our Water Planning Division Director, Kathryn Perzyck, our Land Division Director, and last but not least, Tiffany, our Enforcement Division Director. So I guess without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mike Rolband, our new Director of DEQ. Known Mike a long time, and I don't want to keep belaboring the point. He's got a lot to say, but it's great that he's able to join us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon, everybody. It's really weird to stand up here. I've been to Environment Virginia probably 25 times over the past, but always on the other side. But I have to express my appreciation to Governor Youngkin, number one, for giving me this opportunity. As some of you know me, I retired and I failed at that and decided I'd try something totally different. What I'm going to talk about today is kind of a vision for the transformation of DEQ. And I only have 20 minutes, I'm told, so I'm going to rush over the first few slides, and hopefully there'll be questions later, I guess, at the end of the panel. But the number one thing I want to express to everybody is that DEQ has a strong foundation. For over 30 years, I obtained permits from lots of agencies, including DEQ, and not just because I'm standing here, truthfully, they're the most effective, efficient agency we ever deal with. It gets frustrating sometimes because there's other agencies involved in the different permit processes, but truly, DEQ has an amazing foundation. And what I want to talk about is how we're going to build upon this foundation to make it better. Just like a private sector company where I spent 40 years of my life in the private sector, we always wanted to strive for continuous improvement, and that's what we're going to do. So the mission, the vision, the values of DEQ has not changed whatsoever. They're all the same. And our values expressed in the 7 C's that many of you have heard about for many, many years, again, that hasn't changed whatsoever. What I am changing a little bit is integrating all that into one goal, And I'm basically taking this goal from the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act's preamble and tailoring it a little bit so that we understand that this applies to all of Virginia and every aspect of our environment. It's not just the Chesapeake Bay, it's not just our water quality, it's air, land, and water. So we have to always remember as we go through the different permitting processes that we need to balance economic progress, economic development, and a healthy environment. They're integrally related because if you don't have a prosperous economy, you can't afford to protect the environment. And if you travel around and look at other countries, some of the most horrible environmental problems are in countries that don't have the money to invest in protecting the environment because they're trying to just eat. They're trying to survive. So we're very lucky where we live. We're way beyond that. The formula for success is expressed in this pyramid. Again, I won't take the time to go through this in detail, but I think the key is transparency and communication and trust, and the collaboration is our foundation. And the very pinnacle is continuous improvement. That's something we're adding now. So I want to move to this future, and we're going to improve the things by process clarity focus, customer support focus, transparency, and communications. So there's 4 main initiatives that I've announced in previous events with our staff as well as some other public events. It's 1 DEQ, which is not a new idea. Tom Fay and Dave Paler expressed that. We need to really push it. Permitting enhancement and evaluation platform or program is PEEP, okay? And I like PEEPs. And so if you want some PEEPs later, go to the DEQ booth. I bought a whole bunch of PEEPs, okay? So you need a little sugar high and coffee, which I need some coffee and some sugar, but I'll maybe later today. 1 stormwater manual that includes BMPs and erosion control as well, and we'll talk more about that. And then a commodity trading to improve mitigation performance. So first of all, 1 DEQ. The question might be why? We have 6 regional offices and we have a central office. And what I want to do is better balance the workload between all these groups. Because what you'll see is there'll be surges of work. For example, there might be a huge automobile manufacturer that wants to move into Southwest Virginia. Well, we are going to need more people to support the permitting process for that huge project, potentially. So you might have to draw upon other resources from other areas. Or vice versa, Northern Virginia might be really busy, and they need help, and people in Southwest have some time. So I want to have a better workflow and work sharing, particularly with today's technology, that'll improve our capacity without when we have limited resources. The other thing is staff. You know, we need to grow people that are strong in all areas of our media. We need multimedia people, multimedia managers, people that can help progress, because it's not just a wetland permit problem sometimes. It's not just an air permit. A lot of people need all of the above. So we need to have a team of people that can advance with their career in multimedia areas and work together. Not that they don't work together now, but I want to improve that. So PEEP, I'm having a little fun here, but what we're going to do is develop a critical path management scheduling system for every class of permits that DEQ touches. That includes all the different agencies that are consulting agencies or co-agencies like the Army Corps. And it's simple. We have staff now full assigned, 100% taken off their other positions to begin this process. And what we want to do is create a critical path schedule using existing MOAs, existing regulatory requirements, and chart the path of what you have to do to get that approval. But we're going to now make it transparent, and we're going to communicate to the public where we stand. So that will be online. It'll show where it is and how long it's taking. We're going to compare every project, every permit to the goal, okay? And the idea is that permittees now don't have to complain like I hear all the time, we don't know where our permit is. And then management at all the different agencies can look and see what's happening, and it might mean we need more resources in a particular spot. It's hard to get that information right now. So this will enable us to use our resources more effectively, to focus them where there's a critical path bottleneck. And the interesting thing will be working with all these other agencies. A lot of people understand the problem sometimes where it's stuck in XYZ agency and we're just waiting. We can't issue the permit till we hear back from them. Well, now we'll all know, and we'll go to that agency. So this system ideally, when it's perfected, will automatically alert the people working on the permits when the due dates are hitting, given advanced knowledge, and then if it's missing the dates, it'll go up to higher levels of management based on how long it takes, so that the management can focus on a problem and solve that bottleneck with resources. Or sometimes we have to just say no or send it back. One of the biggest problems I've seen is that a lot of people are submitting incomplete applications, and it's wasting our staff's time. So we're going to have to enforce that QA/QC checklist right in the very beginning and not spend all this unnecessary time, so that the people that do it right, that send good applications in, will get better performance. So that is PEEP, and that will affect a lot of things. Stormwater programs. 39% of the almost 25,000 permits that DEQ issued last year in the stormwater area. And 80% probably the complaints I've gotten in my first 2 months on the job are about stormwater. and as a lot of you know, I like stormwater. I love it. Wetlands are tad better though. Wetlands and streams. But anyway, why? Well, the fundamental problem hasn't changed in almost 25 years. And 20-something years ago, DCR was going to do this. It's transferred to DEQ in 2014. And that's creating one comprehensive manual so that people that design stormwater facilities, people and plans, people that inspect them, and people that review the plans know what's required. It's very fundamental. We have 5 manuals and a whole bunch of technical guidance and bulletins. The first manual that we use goes back to 1988. That's the Chesapeake Bay Board manual. We have the E&S control VESH handbook. That's 1992. Well, you know, I did get out of grad school in 82, so it's not that old, right? But, but seriously, 30 years is too damn long. It never got updated. We've got a couple other manuals from 99, 2011. None of them are consistent with today's regulations. None of them are consistent with each other. And no wonder no one knows what to do, and there's all these arguments. So we've hired a guy. He starts April 4th. His #1 job is to coordinate a very tough effort with lots of stakeholders and hopefully lots of people in this room. And we're all going to get together, and we are going to figure it out and get one manual. And we're going to make it a living document so that it doesn't expire. It doesn't get out of date by 30 years. We're going to have it all together in one place. After we get that done, I want to do something more like what ESI does in Northern Virginia, which is have training requirements and certification requirements to reduce the review workloads. The last aspect is commodity trading. We have streams, wetlands, and nutrient credits right now. And there's all sorts of ongoing shortages periodically and gluts periodically because there's a lack of timely information regarding the supply, the demand, and the price. And because we're trying to do a market system without transparency, it doesn't work very well. So it's very simple. There are commodity trading systems in the United States as well as elsewhere in the world for over probably, I think the commodity exchange in Chicago was like 1880 maybe? I mean, it's been around, the idea. So what I want to do is have a commodity trading platform that lets people buy and sell these credits real time. They get extinguished when they're associated with a permit and used. But if you don't use them, they're not extinguished. This is going to take some coordination and work, obviously with the Army Corps as well as internally in DEQ. And it's going to take some change in how we do business. But this will help everybody. We won't have these shortages as much. We'll still have them probably. But with everyone knowing where the supply is, where the demand is, and what the price is, the market can adjust much more accurately. So intermittent steps. How am I doing for time? Okay. It's going to take a while to do all that, and there's going to be a lot of consternation. So we're looking at 4 guidance documents. Stormwater management outfalls. That is a huge issue, and a lot of people don't read the law. For example, we made some changes in 2005, and I've had some meetings where people are not knowledgeable of this change. Solar, we'll talk about that in a little bit. There's a lot of problems with solar across the state and a lot of angst in the General Assembly about damage to the environment from solar projects. Farm and agribusiness, that's another interesting, difficult area of guidance for stormwater. And then environmental justice. And we'll talk about that more in a second as well, where we need to integrate the environmental justice programs into the culture of DEQ and every permit program. And to do that, we need a guidance document. Now, these guidance documents will be promulgated for public comment and review, so we're not just doing it in a vacuum, because we have to get input and we have to make it work. The solar problem is very simple. Solar panels are impervious. Water does not go through the panel. It acts as like a roof. And there's all sorts of problems with erosion control and off-site flooding from solar projects, from large-scale solar facilities. The fundamental issue is that for several years now, to encourage or to reduce costs for this industry, a decision was made that is not in guidance and not in regulation that solar panels are pervious. Now, that's a problem for the downstream owners. It doesn't follow MS-19, Minimum Standard 19, and the 1992 Erosion Sediment Control Handbook, so we're causing damage to people. And we're not supposed to do that. Professional engineers definitely are not supposed to do that and approve those plans. So we want to fix that problem. And today, I believe any minute, a letter is going out in the interim to tell people in this industry that you have to count it as unconnected impervious area. On top of that, the Chesapeake Bay program wrote to us last week to tell us that these are counted as impervious areas. And we have to account for the loads in our TMDL. So now, because we didn't do this, the rest of the Virginians are going to have to account and remove more pollution to offset what wasn't done by these particular facilities. So that's a real problem for everybody. The next guidance, outfalls in the middle is a picture of a classic Fairfax County outfall problem where the engineer obviously didn't look at the stream. The contractor tried to build what was on the plans. He tried to get the riprap and the filter fabric down to the edge of the stream. This is not a good outfall, people. It doesn't comply with any regulation. And so there are so many outfall problems. So another guidance document that's in the works right now, instead of waiting until we get the manuals done, is going to try to provide specific education to people so they know how to design properly and account for stormwater outfall requirements. Farms and agribusiness is a guidance document we have not started yet. We have some meetings planned with the Secretary of Agriculture and his departments because agribusiness is an interesting, tough issue. Because of historical exemptions for certain facilities on farms, there's always been a question, and it's being handled differently across the Commonwealth, as to, for example, if you build a winery or a brewery on a farm, the building may be exempt from building codes, but are the roads and the parking areas exempt from stormwater management and erosion and sediment control requirements? So it's an interesting question. It's being handled differently everywhere. So we need to first get all the agencies involved to talk about it and decide what is the appropriate policy so that the reviewers and the inspectors don't have to get whipsawed all the time like we're doing right now by these competing interests. And then, once we figure out what the agencies and all the departments want to do, we can put together a guidance document, put it out for public comment, and then get feedback and try to figure out an answer, because that is probably going to be one of the tougher areas to find what's right for everybody. Last but not least, environmental justice. What we're working on, Renee Hoyes is the director of that group, is developing a guidance document that takes every class of permits and first analyzes them in terms of what do we need to do for environmental justice. For example, a nationwide permit, well, with a 401 certification, should we address that at the 401 certification time, or we should just say it's a small de minimis project, that's why it's a nationwide permit with its 401 water quality certification. So perhaps that goes in a category that doesn't need a detailed environmental justice review. But other permits, a lot of IPs, and also it depends on the activities, they probably need a lot of involvement. So we're going to develop a guidance document that explains exactly how every class of permit is going to be assessed. And that assessment process will be put into our PEEP program, our critical path schedule. It will be there'll be several tasks that start concurrently. That'll be one of the concurrent steps that starts immediately after an application is submitted. so that we can have a yes or no, is there a problem or not? And if there is a potential environmental justice problem, which can take some time because of the stakeholder involvement, it can start right away, so you don't hopefully delay a project because you didn't look at that till the end. So that's another tough document to prepare, but the cool thing about that is once we get these out, once we get the public involved, get public comment, and get buy-in from everybody, then people will have rules for the road. And that's what I hope will then, in the long run, achieve our goal of a more effective permitting agency. Last topic is responsiveness and communication. And some agencies, and I won't name them, they're federal agencies, you write to them, and if you're lucky, they have a goal of 60 days to respond to your email. And then sometimes they'll just respond saying they haven't had time to respond. DEQ is much better, but we still can improve on our responsiveness and our communication. We've got an amazing emergency response team. The top picture is one of them. We've got to just convey to everybody that we need to do our best at responding promptly and precisely to people. I will ask, though, that sometimes if you over-communicate, that's not helpful. Like one particular person that wrote me 50-something emails on one freaking weekend, okay? I mean, that makes you not want to respond. So we have to, there has to be a balance, okay? But we got to try not just to respond, but to respond effectively, and that's our communication. Our communication department is being integrated in all the aspects of DEQ so that we can improve that communication. Be it our website improvements, be it future newsletters. I know social media, and as most people, I don't do social media, but that exists, I hear. The other pictures I just want to say is a proud example of DEQ, emergency response. Bristol, Virginia, I've been there twice now in this 2 months. They have a really terrible problem with their landfill, and it is an emergency. So, example of DEQ, everyone working together. We responded. We used our emergency funds. We got Virginia Tech to be the chairman of the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department, to be the chair of an expert panel. We assembled 10 experts from around the country, the U.S. and Canada, and convened last week in Bristol, Virginia for 2.5 days. And they're now working remotely after being there together for 2.5 days to work on a report to give to the city a direction to go. It's a difficult problem. There's not a consensus. That's why we had to get a panel of experts, because there's all different opinions, but no one's really sure what to do. And we're darn close to getting a consensus on a solution, and we will then give that report to the city so that they can implement it. They may need more resources, of course, to do that, but it's a terrible problem. But again, I just want to show this as an example of responsiveness from a team. It took an amazing effort from multiple departments within DEQ, from purchasing, to hazardous waste, to solid waste rather, Kathryn's, and the office in Southwest Virginia, Jeff Hurst's office, to all collectively work together to respond to a crisis. And I'm really proud of the way, and communications as well was very involved, and environmental justice. It's taken every group, basically, in DEQ to respond to this. And it's going to take all of them in the future, because we're going to have air quality problems, we have water quality problems, we have solid waste issues. It's everybody's problem. And so that's just a great example of how this team can work together, and we just want to keep doing that. So with that, I think I've probably used up most of my time, and I guess the questions and answers are for later. And for those that know me and my dogs, they won't let me bring them to the office. So.
Thank you, Mike. Before we get into our next speaker, which is Mike Dowd, our Air and Renewable Energy Director, I just wanted to go over a couple overarching kind of things that happened. One of them was in the General Assembly with a board bill, Senate Bill 657, that was passed, and it's awaiting action by the governor. He has until, I believe, April 11th. But this bill authorizes the department to be the main permit authority and takes away the authority of the boards to actually issue permits, take final actions in the air and the water board, the waste board never had that authority. So the air and the water boards, in essence, would be acting on regulatory actions. There's some other nuances with the bill that also allows for a process where the public can ask for a public hearing, but instead of it being in front of the board, it would be in front of DEQ, and that we're also supposed to notify the board of any controversial permits, which basically would be the same threshold we would have used if we were sending permits to the board in the past. So more to come on this as far as how it gets implemented, but it would become effective July 1st, and we'll just see what the governor does with that. The other one is PFAS. I know that's been a popular topic across the country. And in Virginia, we've been working mostly with military installations where they've been doing a lot of investigation and have found it both on-site and off-site in impacts. But we recently have been working with the Richmond Airport Authority and two Air and Army National Guards on a PFAS issue near the airport there, and that's an ongoing investigation. But I just wanted to briefly touch upon a strategy that we've began to implement. In fact, this week we sent out 700 surveys to different businesses and industry across the Commonwealth asking for historic and current uses of PFAS and how it may have been managed, releases, to gain some knowledge on where we may have issues across the Commonwealth and kind of, peeling back the onion and building up a strategy for how to identify these areas and look for then how to remediate. If you look for these class of forever chemicals, you'll find them. So we're really interested, especially in those that may be near public water intakes, for example. And we also are embarking on this spring an ambient monitoring program across the Commonwealth where we're working with the USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey, to conduct surface water and sediment sampling for various class of PFAS compounds, and we've selected sites for in a variety of different methods. But this is just the first round of that, and that may lead to some fish tissue analysis. We're doing some of that over by the Richmond Airport as part of our investigation there. And we've been working with our partners, Henrico County and the Virginia Department of Health, as they've been doing private well testing as well. So we'll start to see more of this. When we look for it, we'll find it, and we're working with our other agencies in addressing it. But for now, I wanted to share that kind of overarching update on what we're doing with PFAS in Virginia. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Good afternoon. Boy, I'm Mike Dowd, Director of the Air and Renewable Energy Division for DEQ, and it is great to be back here. This is the first overnight business trip I think I've taken in 2 years, over 2 years. So as we gradually ease back into things, Jeff is right. We're starting to come back gradually to work. I'm in the office now 3 days a week. Jeff's in more than that, and soon it'll almost be like normal. These are the topics. Let me figure this out here. Yeah, it's a little out of sync. These are the topics I'd like to cover today. They include air and renewable energy, permit numbers, which indicate that permit work has not really slowed down over the past couple of years. I want to talk about EPA's new proposed interstate transport rule, a word about DEQ's upcoming greenhouse gas regulatory work group, and some General Assembly activities that affect DEQ and perhaps many of you here. But first I want to mention some recent trends in Virginia's air quality, which is all good. And I don't know why this is out of shape, but here it is. Although it's hard to see on this slide, we have improved tremendously from the days in 2000 when Virginia had 90 high ozone days. We had only 4 high ozone days in 2020 and only 1 in 2021. Virginia's monitored ozone concentrations continued to drop last year to the point that even Northern Virginia now has what's called clean data, meaning that Northern Virginia has now basically achieved the 2015 Ozone National Ambient Air Quality Standard as that standard is measured. Northern Virginia has not been designated for attainment, though. That's a process that takes several years, and our grasp with compliance with the NAAQS may be tenuous. because it's an open question as to whether some of the lower emissions that have caused our lower concentrations may have been due to COVID or not. So we're just going to see what happens this summer in the next ozone season and keep our fingers crossed. Now, this chart shows that Virginia's annual fine particulate matter monitored concentrations remain well below the PM 2.5 NAAQS. Monitored ambient concentrations of all other criteria pollutants, such as sulfur dioxide, oxides of nitrogen, lead, and carbon monoxide, remain well below the NAAQS as well. And this chart shows the cumulative reductions over the years in Virginia of volatile organic compounds, oxides of nitrogen, sulfur dioxide, and PM 2.5. It shows a nice downward trend. The biggest reduction there, of course, is green. That's sulfur dioxide, but there's also been reductions in VOCs and NOx as well. So we hope those trends continue. These are our air permit numbers. In 2021, DEQ completed 456 air permit actions that included 353 minor source permits, 10 major source permits, 34 Title V permits, nearly all of them renewables, 45 state operating permits, and 14 general permits. In our small renewable energy permit by rule program, potential applicants have submitted a total of 60 notices of intent, and we now have a total of 108 solar projects covered by the small renewable energy permit by rule. These include 67 projects with a rated capacity greater than 5 megawatts and a disturbance zone greater than 10 acres. It also includes 41 projects equal to or less than 5 megawatts or a disturbance zone equal to or less than 10 acres. DEQ's PBR program continues to grow as Virginia's demand for solar generation continues to grow as well to meet the zero carbon goals of the Virginia Clean Economy Act. And I'll say all those projects combined, including the notices of intent, involve about over 70,000 acres of land. So it is a large commitment of land that's going to solar projects. Let me now turn to EPA's recently proposed Good Neighbor Rule. This just came out a couple of weeks ago. EPA announced on March 10th a proposed ozone interstate transport, what's called a federal implementation plan covering 25 states, including Virginia. The purpose of the rule is to reduce these states' contribution to ozone-forming pollutant emissions to downwind states that do not meet the ozone NAAQS as required by the Good Neighbor provisions of the Clean Air Act. Now, the proposed rule allows for NOx trading among electric generating units, but sets NOx emission caps on states. This is somewhat new, and sets daily NOx emission limits on electric generating units to ensure consistent utilization of existing emission controls, especially on high energy demand days. This had been a very serious request from the Northeast states, the upwind states, saying that there have been a lot of facilities, not really only one in Virginia, that have pollution control equipment, power plants that have pollution control equipment, that they don't operate on a consistent basis or at all, because it's cheaper to buy allowances than it is to reduce emissions. And this is especially true in what I call high energy demand days. High temperature days where the temperature gets really hot, demand for power goes up. So those power plants that add peak generation are now going to be required to run their controls if they have them. The proposed rule also sets limits on the number of allowances that can be banked. But perhaps most significantly, the proposed rule sets emission standards and controls for large industrial sources too. For the first time since the 1990s, EPA is going beyond the power sector to address transported pollution. For Virginia, the ozone season caps established for the power sector require fairly modest reductions in NOx starting in 2023, and that's mainly due to the fact that power sector emissions in Virginia have gone down by over 50% in the past 10 years. The rule's larger impact is likely to be felt in Virginia's industrial sector, where new emission standards that will kick in 2026 will impact paper mills, cement plants, natural gas compressor stations, and possibly other sources in Virginia. DEQ, folks in my division are now evaluating the proposed rule and its potential impact on Virginia's power sector and industrial sources. There will be a 60-day public comment period on the proposed rule following its publication in the Federal Register. It hasn't been published in the Federal Register yet, so the comment period hasn't started. But we'll seriously be thinking about drafting comments. Now, just a brief word about some upcoming activities in the DEQ Air Division. Brief word about our greenhouse gas inventory work, which is left over from the 2021 General Assembly. The 2021 General Assembly, Acts of Assembly, created Virginia Code Section 10.11307.04 that requires DEQ to conduct a comprehensive statewide baseline and projection inventory of all greenhouse gas emissions and to update this inventory every 4 years. The State Air Pollution Control Board is given authority to adopt regulations necessary to collect from all sources the data needed for DEQ to conduct and update and maintain this inventory. Now, the regulatory development process for this regulation will begin in April with the solicitation and selection of an ad hoc advisory group. The regulatory process itself, the GHG inventory regulation, will then undergo the full APA, Administrative Process Act process. Now, this is not to say we have no idea what Virginia's greenhouse gas emissions are. We do have some data. This chart breaks down our best estimates of the relative proportion of greenhouse gas emissions across all sectors of the state's economy based on the data we do have. The leading source of GHG emissions by far is the transportation sector with nearly 35% of total emissions. And then after that, you have industrial sources, commercial energy consumption, and residential energy consumption, which come in roughly equal, about 18% each. And what that rulemaking will do will enable DEQ to collect the data necessary to have a more comprehensive and more accurate inventory. Now let me turn to some bills from the recent 2022 General Assembly. Now, perhaps the bill with the biggest impact on DEQ overall is SB 657, which we call the board bill. But Jeff already spoke about that, and I really don't have much to say on that or to add. But it will have a big impact, obviously, on air permitting as well as all the other permitting programs that go to either the air or the water board. So let me start here by saying a few words about SB 565, which directs DEQ to convene a stakeholder work group to determine the feasibility of setting a statewide methane reduction goal and develop a plan to achieve it. DEQ actually established a methane regulatory work group back in 2018. A notice of intended rulemaking or intended regulatory action in OIRA was published in April of 2021, and the purpose was to develop a framework for limiting methane leakage from natural gas infrastructure. Now, that regulatory process has been held in abeyance pending the outcome of a current EPA regulatory initiative, because late last year, EPA proposed regulations for the control of methane emissions from oil and gas infrastructure. EPA is expected to finalize that rule by early 2023. The existing DEQ methane work group will be merged with that required by SB 565. It will assess the feasibility of going beyond EPA's final oil and gas rules, whatever they may be, and report its recommendations to the General Assembly by July of 2023. Okay, and I'll move on to another bill from last session that will significantly affect our permit by rule program. HB 206, and I think Director Rolband alluded to this somewhat in his presentation, but HB 206 will require DEQ to assess the impact of small renewable energy projects on prime agricultural soils and forest land. HB 206 amends Virginia Code Section 10.1-1197.6 and provides that small renewable energy projects that disturb more than 10 acres of prime agricultural soils or 50 acres of contiguous forest lands are per se deemed to have a significant adverse impact on the environment. Applicants that propose disturbing more than 10 acres of prime agricultural soils or 50 acres of forest land must submit a plan detailing reasonable actions the applicant will take to avoid, minimize, or mitigate such impacts. These new requirements will become effective upon adoption of implementing regulations by the DEQ. Now, turning to the regulatory adoption process, HB 206 directs DEQ to convene an advisory panel to assist in developing these regulations, which must do two things. First, establish criteria to determine if a significant adverse impact to prime agricultural soils or forest lands is likely to occur as a result of a project. And second, to establish criteria for applicants to follow to mitigate such impacts. Now, in developing these regulations, or these criteria, DEQ must consider numerous factors, such as mitigation techniques to avoid, minimize, or otherwise mitigate these adverse impacts, the cost of mitigation relative to project cost, on-site minimization of such impacts, the payment of in lieu fees as a mitigation measure, and a few others as well. Now, HB 206 requires that DEQ promulgate these regulations with the assistance of an extensive stakeholder work group. This work group has been described by Senator Chap Peterson as the mother of all stakeholder groups. And he did. I thank the senator for his quote there. The law specifically calls out 19 stakeholder groups for inclusion in the work group, and it must contain basically everybody under the sun and then anybody we've forgotten. The HB 206 requires that the final regulations be adopted no later than December 31st, 2024. But before then, the advisory panel must submit a report to the governor and General Assembly no later than December 1st of this year in order to give next year's General Assembly a chance to act on those recommendations if it feels appropriate. And that concludes my presentation. We'll have questions afterwards. Hope I didn't, time came in good, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Melanie Davenport. I'm the director of the Water Permitting Division, and as all of my other colleagues have said before me, it is great to be here in person, and it's a pleasure to see everyone. There's an awful lot that happens outside of these sessions at this conference. A lot of conversation, a lot of just really good interaction, so it's great to be here. I'm going to my presentation on water permitting regulatory update will cover completed regulatory actions, what's going on with our general permit regulations, guidance development, and compliance and enforcement updates. I could probably spend the better part of an afternoon going through in a whole lot of detail every one of the things that I'm about to touch on today. And my plan is to draw attention to a few things that I think might be of particular interest. But this is also embodied in the presentation is really an overview of a lot of the things that we've been working on in the Water Permitting Division since I gave this update last year. So if there is something of particular interest that I don't spend a lot of time on, please feel free to reach out to me later on after the conference, because it really is, Mike laughs about the number of permits that are related to water. Water is without a doubt the largest chunk of what goes on at DEQ, so it's really hard to kind of fit everything into the 15 or 20 minutes. So reg actions that have been completed since the last time I spoke to you. First, the water quality criteria for ammonia. These were adopted back in October of 2020, but we are still working on we're still working on implementation guidance. That's because the regulation actually calls out for phased implementation in permits. So, and the costs and the upgrades associated with meeting these new water quality criteria for ammonia will be very costly for a number of facilities, especially smaller facilities. So we have been working really hard to come up with implementation guidance that provides as much technical flexibility as possible, but still results in achievement of the criteria, protection of water quality, and protection of aquatic resources. So yes, it's fair to say it has taken us a while to work through this guidance document, but there were a number of issues that we've had to address, and we hope to have what we're calling our final draft going out to the folks we've been working with both at the Virginia Manufacturers Association, the Virginia Association of Municipal Wastewater Agencies, as well as NGOs. So stay tuned for finalization of that. The other action that we completed that became effective in October this year is implementation into our regulations of what is called the Enhanced Nutrient Removal Certainty Program. If you are a student of what is going on with Chesapeake Bay WIP implementation and regulatory requirements on the point sources, we actually had proposed a regulation that implemented WIP Initiative 53 and something called floating waste load allocations, and along with that, we also included some other things related to taking back unused waste load allocation, and also to true up waste load allocations for chlorophyll for facilities in the James River, as a result of the chlorophyll A study in the James River. So we had to actually bifurcate that action because of what the General Assembly did in 2021, and those enhanced nutrient removal waste load allocations have been finally adopted into our water quality management planning regulation. The other thing that we completed, again, as a result of the 2021 session, is to implement a DEQ review of erosion and sediment control plans for solar projects greater than 5 megawatts. The idea there being that you can't always divorce what happens in E&S control and stormwater control, and a number of these projects are being built in areas that are not local VSMP, Virginia Stormwater Management Program authorities. So this allows DEQ, who serves as the stormwater plan reviewer in those localities, to at the same time process erosion and sediment control plans for approval. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we did reissue our final regulation and general permit for poultry waste management. We did that early in 2021. What is phasing in, though, is our annual reporting of poultry litter transfers. And for permitted growers, they're required to report to DEQ upon request in this year for what they have transferred. And then beginning in 2023, those reports have to come in annually by the 15th. And this is because we are building a database for folks to be able to report that information and allow us to track it. And then for unpermitted end users, there is a requirement to report, if we ask, up through 2023, and then beginning in 2024, they're required to submit an annual report again by September 15th. The other thing I wanted to mention is we did complete a regulatory action to implement House Bill 1983 of the 2021 session, which is a bill that allows DEQ to accept purchase of wetland and stream mitigation bank credits outside of a provider's primary service area. There are parts of the Commonwealth where development has really reduced those credits. So we built in a system where that it's possible to go to a secondary service area under the certain requirements that are articulated in the regulation. What I mentioned before, still in progress, are the other two parts of the water quality management planning regulation related to waste load allocations. One is the establishing total nitrogen and total phosphorus allocations as a result of the changes that were made to the chlorophyll A criteria in the Title James, and then to unallocate unneeded industrial waste load allocation, and that's just on a slightly different schedule than that first part, which was the enhanced nutrient certainty reduction. So the State Water Control Board just approved this regulation as final back in December, and the next step in that review process is executive review. The next three reg actions I kind of lump together because they all have to do with what is an appropriate fee schedule that DEQ charges for 3 different activities. First, for review of those erosion and sediment control plans of solar projects. 2, what is an appropriate permit fee for both our municipal separate storm sewer system permits and construction activities. And then 3, what is an appropriate application fee schedule for folks who are applying for us to certify nutrient banks and certify nutrient credits. For those latter 2, the General Assembly directed DEQ to come up with a fee schedule that covers 60 to 62% of the operating costs of the program. So we currently have a regulatory advisory panel in process right now. And I know that nobody's favorite topic is fees, but there will be changes coming out to those fee schedules in the near future. Another thing I mentioned last time, that we were taking a look at regulatory amendments to streamline the distribution and marketing of exceptional quality, or EQ, biosolids. We have put that on hold and are waiting for EPA's risk analysis of PFAS in biosolids before we move forward with that action. We need to have the technical information before we do that, and we're expecting that risk analysis to be completed by the last quarter of 2024. This is a laundry list of general permit regulations that are in process. Because these regulations are actually general VIPDES permits, they have to be reissued every 5 years. They cannot exist for a term greater than 5 years. So reissuing all of our general permits is a pretty stable source of work in the division. But I did want to bring attention to 2 in particular. Let's see. And that is the last 2 on this list. In my mind, the 2 most significant general permits that we do have in place are our industrial stormwater general permit and our construction stormwater general permit. Just wanted to let you know, if you are interested in what will happen with the next reissuance of the industrial stormwater GP, we expect to publish a NOIRA by April 11th, which means that will be the kickoff of the revision to that permit. So if that's something you're interested in, please keep an eye out both on the DEQ website and the Virginia Regulatory Town Hall, because we will be looking for volunteers to join us in a technical advisory committee to reissue that permit. In the same vein, believe it or not, the construction stormwater general permit comes due also in June of 2024. Our 2 biggest permits are on the same schedule. And we published our notice of intended regulatory action for the construction GP just yesterday. It was in the Federal Register yesterday. So again, if that's something that you're interested in, please make sure that you follow the steps in the NOIRA, and if you would like to participate in the TAC, let us know. Again, I don't need to go into the details of all of these general permits. Guidance development, we're working on a couple pretty important guidance documents in the Water Permitting Division. The first has to do with the use of stormwater proprietary best management practices to meet technical requirements of the Virginia Stormwater Management Program. We just finished local water quality protections for non-point source nutrient credit use. We are drafting amendments, as I mentioned before, on existing guidance on implementing the new ammonia water quality criteria. And then the 2 guidance documents that Mike Rolband mentioned, guidance for solar projects regarding the panel arrays, and then also some additional guidance on properly interpreting the water quantity technical criteria and outfall issues. Now I'm going to jump to a little bit talking about our wetlands and stream program. If you have followed all of this, there has been a lot of activity at the federal level, initially at EPA and then subsequently in the federal courts. I wanted to mention that at the end of August this year, the U.S. District Court for the District of Arizona vacated the latest iteration of the Navigable Waters Protection Rule. And EPA has halted the implementation of that rule and has very clearly told us as a sister regulatory agency that they are interpreting the definition of waters of the United States consistent with the pre-2015 regulatory regime. So that means the WOTUS that was proposed 2015, 2016, 2017, which caused a lot of consternation, which was then taken back and rewritten under the last federal administration. Both of those rules are out, and we're back to pre-2015 guidance on what is a water of the United States. And actually, EPA, and I don't understand why they have to do this because the federal regulatory system is a little bit different than the state, but basically they published rule that proposed putting that definition back to the 2015 definition. In the same vein, the regulations that EPA adopted back in September of 2020, which were meant to update the requirements and the implementation of Section 401 of the Clean Water Act, which is the state's water quality certification process. That was also remanded and vacated in an October 2021 decision from a different federal court. But basically, we are now back to EPA's 1971 rule on how the states process 401 water quality certifications. So the 401 issue particularly has caused some real challenges as we worked through what was going on and what were going to be the state's decisions on all of the Corps' nationwide permits. And then the Corps made it a bit more complicated by actually breaking apart the reissuance of the nationwide permits. So they reissued 16 nationwide permits in January of last year, January 2021. And the process we used for issuing 401 water quality certification and also in terms of general conditions followed the rule that has since been vacated. So now an additional 41 nationwides were reissued in February of this year. I think it's fair to say that this is all really, really, really confusing. So the most important thing about this slide is DEQ and the Corps are conducting a virtual training session, which is on April 14th. The link up here is how you register for it. If you want to hear the ins and outs and what has happened and what are the differences in gaining coverage under a Corps nationwide permit, what are the requirements for DEQ, please be sure to register for that session because they will provide a lot more information than I can in my couple minutes discussing it here. I always like to point out that even with all these confusions, with what's going on at the federal level, that state law and authority remain in place, and there is no change to water protections in Virginia. The overlap between federal waters and state waters was diminished by the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, but now that we are back to the pre-2015 Waters of the United States rule, we see that we're much more aligned in terms of projects that are covered by the state permit are also covered by the Corps permit. So we are hoping that some of the challenges and some of the loss of efficiency that we had because of Navigable Waters Protection Rule is being resolved. And I also have to say that we have been collaborating really closely with the Corps and remain committed to making these parallel permit processes as efficient as we can, but also protective of Virginia's water and our aquatic resources. Wanted to spend a minute talking about enforcement and compliance updates. Actually, it's more compliance updates because Tiffany will be talking about enforcement. But we had issued COVID-19 compliance and enforcement flexibility. That came to an end on July 1st of 2021 as Executive Order 51, which declared a state of emergency due to COVID had expired. EPA also has provided some extended flexibilities to states and localities, states and territories in terms of meeting our inspection requirements. That was supposed to expire at the end of December, but they have extended it again until the end of this month. I would say that we have been able to keep up with our inspection commitments and really haven't not had to take advantage of those flexibilities. I always talk about e-reporting, and I feel like I've been talking about this for years, but it really is on the cusp of happening. And we will be requiring electronic submission of DMR data for individual permits and general permits September 30th, 2022. So 6 months from now, we're working really hard with our IT folks to get this system in process. But we will be, if you hold a permit from us, whether it's an individual permit or a general permit, and it requires DMR submittals, those are going to have to be electronic as of the end of September, which I guess puts you in the October 10th reporting cycle. We had an extension, there's been an extension for additional program reports and anything that is not data. So any reports that come to us that are narrative in nature rather than numerical in nature, our extension for that's been extended to December 2025. That's going to be problematic because we're going to have to build this system to accept reports and a whole lot of words and a whole lot of information. But we've got 2.5, almost 3 years to do that. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that back in 2018, EPA initiated a national compliance initiative, which is designed to reduce significant noncompliance at VPDES permitted facilities. The goal was to reduce that SNC rate by 50% by the end of 2022. So to go from 20.3% of facilities that had VPDES permits were in noncompliance to no more than 10.1%. EPA published a 2020 compliance advisory. The link to that is up here. And then also they've spent a lot of time focusing on smaller mechanical wastewater treatment plants, recognizing that those have a much harder time meeting permit limits. And if you operate one of those, or if you have one of those in your localities, this is a great compliance advisory. Finally, I thought it was interesting to take a look at where does Virginia stand in terms of significant noncompliance. And for calendar year 2021, when you look at the group of major individual permits in Virginia, 6 out of 150 were in significant noncompliance. Calendar year 2021, which is 4%, which is well below the goal of the 10.1%. When you look at non-major individual permits, and non-major generally means smaller facilities, 38 out of 687, which is a noncompliance rate of 5.5%. And then even with general permits, which is a universe of folks who are much smaller facilities. Typically, they have much less infrastructure. You know, it's a car wash. It is really small places. Even there, our SNC rate for 2021 was under the 10.1, and it was 9%. So Virginia continues to operate. What I'm very proud of is a great compliance program. And with that, did I run over time? You're good. Okay. As I said, I'm sorry. There's just a lot to cover. So Jutta Schneider, who is the Director of Water Planning, will provide an update on the other elements of our water programs.
Thank you, Melanie, and I joined the previous speakers in being very pleased to be here in person this year. My name is Jutta Schneider, and I'm the Director of the Water Planning Division at DEQ. And I will give you a quick update on what's happening in those programs. All right. So I've grouped my update by the program areas in the division that you see listed here. We'll start out with the Office of Ecology. and the water quality standards. And those of you that have come to this conference over the years or have attended other of our program updates are aware that water quality standards form the basis for a lot of the water quality related activities at DEQ. And periodically we take those, the regulation that includes those standards through what's called the triennial review process. To review the regulation and see if there's any amendments needed to incorporate recommended updates that EPA publishes, and to solicit feedback on any other amendments to the regulation that might be that we might consider. And we're currently in this process. We have proposed a public notice for public comment and or had recently proposed public comment and held a couple of public hearings on the draft amendments. The draft amendments include things like updates to the aluminum criteria, human health criteria. Something that's of interest to quite a few of you here in the room is the copper biotic ligand model as a way to calculate site-specific criteria, and also criteria related to filamentous algae in the Shenandoah River. The public comment period just closed a week or so ago, 10 days or so ago, and we're now reviewing comments and plan to go to the State Water Control Board later on this year, this summer. The next program area that I wanted to briefly touch on is the Water Quality Monitoring and Assessment Program. As you know, DEQ throughout the Commonwealth collects a large number of data points every year in a number of monitoring programs. And every 2 years, we review the data that not only DEQ collects, but that other agencies collect, that other partners collect and send to us to compare them to the state water quality criteria and to evaluate whether or not we meet and support our designated uses. And that information gets published every 2 years in what's called the integrated report. And we are in the process of preparing the 2022 integrated report. Right now, it's a very intense process, lots of data points, lots of data crunching, quality assurance, quality control. And we hope to release the draft 2022 report in late spring, early summer of this year. For public comment. As we've done in years past, we typically have a public webinar that people can listen in where we highlight some of the findings or new developments. And the guidance that we use to interpret the data and make those evaluations is available on our website in case you want to take a look at that. But again, stay tuned for the draft report to be published later on this spring. Wanted to briefly touch a little bit on harmful algal blooms. That's, Jeff mentioned the PFOS, PFOA topic. Harmful algal blooms certainly have kept a lot of us very busy over the last several years. We've had a few events in Lake Anna as well as last year in the Shenandoah River. Working very closely with the health department on developing, what are the protocols, how do we respond to these reports that come into the VDH reporting tool, how do we work on, advisories, what do we do in response to that. And it's a very challenging topic because there really isn't a program or, a dedicated funding source to really evaluate those blooms. And so we've used available resources over the last several years, as has VDH, and it's definitely been a topic of lots of conversations and discussions. And we're in the process now of evaluating our procedures and our guidance documents, again, collectively with VDH to determine, again, what's the best procedures to respond to those reports. In terms of the Chesapeake Bay program coordination, as you know, DEQ coordinates a lot of the data collection from our state agency partners, federal partners, local government partners, PDCs, soil and water conservation districts, in terms of collecting the information that gets reported to EPA to evaluate our progress. We submitted recently the closeout report for the 2020-2021 milestone period, which basically lists all of the commitments and plans that Virginia state agencies and partners have to implement best management practices and make progress toward implementation of the Watershed Implementation Plan. I see a lot of partners in the room. Everybody has really stepped up and contributed in terms of developing those milestones and making those commitments both on the programmatic side and the numeric side. We also submitted the milestones for the current period, 2022 to 23, in January 22, and are waiting for EPA's evaluation of that. There's a lot of discussion going on right now about the tools that EPA uses and how to best finalize the report and their evaluation. So, no dates yet, but stay tuned to hear something about that here in the near future. And both the milestone reports and the current milestone documents are available on our DEQ website that's listed here. Moving on to the Office of Watershed and Local Government Assistance Programs, so we, in terms of the sort of the progression of activities, water quality standards, then we monitor and assess and evaluate what the quality of our state waters is, and if we identify an impairment or a water body that doesn't meet our water quality criteria, we move into what's called the Total Maximum Daily Load Program, or our water cleanup plans. To basically identify what's causing the impairment and to identify ways to mitigate and address it. So we currently have a number of projects underway to address a number of pollutants. 3 projects were recently completed for bacteria, for aquatic life impacts, and for polychlorinated biphenyls, which is a persistent pollutant that we find in fish tissue and is very complex to address as well. You see the other projects that are currently under development here. The bullet at the bottom about the 3 PCB TMDLs, that's a very big project, and we've been working on that for a long time. Source assessment, modeling, all those kinds of tools and technical evaluations take time, but we are in the process of drafting the allocation scenarios, so we expect that to be published and available for our technical advisory committees to review and provide feedback on later on this year. Those of you that have been around a while might remember that way back when we started the TMDL program, because there was a consent decree that governed a lot of the submittal schedules and things like that. In recent years, we have moved from that to what's called the EPA vision for the TMDL program, to basically talk about how do we prioritize impairment for TMDL development, how do we set our schedules, and we are currently in Vision 1 and are working on Vision 2. This is all the fun nomenclature we get to deal with in the Water Planning Division, and so we're hoping to get to Vision 2 here in the next couple of years. You will see the water bodies that we've identified for priorities in the integrated report, in the 2022 integrated report, which is sort of our way of communicating with the public and with interested stakeholders about where we are in terms of our projects and where we hope to focus our efforts over the next couple of years. So if you're interested in that, please take a look at the integrated report, and stay tuned for some future updates as we move into the next cycle of priorities. Want to quickly also mention, we do fund some implementation projects as well, working with soil and water conservation districts and some planning district commissions on implementation of non-point source projects. As you see there, we have about $1.3 million available every year for funding those kinds of projects, and are working with partners to get BMPs on the ground to help focused implementation in those TMDL watersheds. touching quickly on the office, on the local government assistance part of that office. That really is addressing the implementation of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act. Mike mentioned that early on, so we're working in that office on providing oversight and review and technical assistance to local governments in their implementation of the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act through their local programs. We are currently working on guidance to further clarify some regulatory amendments that came out of the 2020 session, where we updated our regulations last year, and are currently working with the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, I see Pam in the audience, and the Virginia Coastal Policy Center on addressing the details of how to implement that as part of the local programs. That guidance addresses the climate adaptation amendment that was part of the regulations, and we're also kicking off and starting a process to evaluate the needed updates to the riparian buffer manual to address the associated tree amendment that was part of that same statutory change in rulemaking. And last but not least, we are getting ready to kick off round 3 of our compliance review process. We've completed the review of all 84 local governments that are subject to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act just recently, and are starting into round 3, where we're hoping to build on the progress that has been made so far and implement some lessons learned for the future of the program. And last but not least, in the Office of Water Supply, we have a number of regulations that are currently being implemented and amended, starting with the 2019 General Assembly, what was at that time Senate Bill 1599, the general permit to incentivize use of the surficial aquifer on the Eastern Shore. And a concurrent or a subsequent but related bill from the 2020 General Assembly, which basically incentivizes the use of the surficial aquifer for non-agricultural irrigation wells. Both of these are working their way through the regulatory process. The Eastern Shore General Permit is currently in executive review, and the general permit for non-agricultural irrigation wells is currently in public comment, which ends on April 15th of this year. We held our 2 public hearings on that already, and, again, hope to take the final to the State Water Control Board later this year. In 2021, the General Assembly also enacted a new law that requires all withdrawal applications to include a water auditing plan and leak detection plan. That NOIRA was published on January 31 of this year, with the comment period, again, that just recently ended, so you can see there's a lot of activities going on in the regulatory world in water supply as well. We are working to put together a regulatory advisory panel for that particular action, and we'll work to develop a draft regulation there to take to the State Water Control Board. And then to follow along with the previous speakers, just a little bit of an idea of our universe there, our permitting universe. 103 groundwater withdrawal permit applications and 29 surface water withdrawal applications that are currently in process. That's a lot of permits. We're still digging out from the backlog of adding new users, adding users that were identified as part of a, compliance review to kind of see, that you might remember on the Eastern Shore, looking at some facilities that needed a permit that didn't have one. And so there's a lot of permits that are being worked on, and the universe is large, and I thought I would at least put in a quick note about the staffing challenges that I think we're not alone in finding ourselves in. It's very challenging to find and retain qualified staff that can address, 100 permits or whatever. It's very daunting, and it's not an easy job, certainly. So if you know anybody that's interested in a water withdrawal job, please reach out to me. We have, opportunities. Let's just leave it there. And then I know I'm getting short on time here, so just quickly, local and regional water supply planning. Some of you are part of our regulatory advisory panel to update that regulation, to make some draft amendments here coming up soon. We have a final wrap meeting scheduled in April to complete discussion of the draft amendments, and again, hope to bring something to the State Water Control Board later this year. And published our State Water Resources Plan. I had the pleasure to update our State Water Control Board on that plan here on Friday, so I believe there's a recording available if you really care about some of the details, or the plan is also published, of course, on our website and awaits your perusal. And last but not least, the big other element of our groundwater permitting program is our groundwater monitoring team. They are currently in the process of finding locations for a lot, relatively speaking, a number of additional wells to support our permitting program and our drought planning program and our, saltwater intrusion monitoring program. So we're very excited to have this opportunity to expand our network, and are working to get the positions filled for that program too. So if you know any geologists, please feel free to have them reach out to me and let we have opportunities. So, and with that, I will end my presentation and turn it over to Kathryn Perzyck to talk about land issues.
I was about to say good morning, and then I realized we've hit the afternoon. I'm in the wrong time. But thank you for having me. I'm Kathryn Perzyck, the Land Division Director. And since I often get a lot of phone calls about other things that sound land-related, I only have waste programs, petroleum storage tanks, so spill response and remediation, and then remediation programs being the Superfund, brownfields, voluntary remediation. So I tried to set my slides in that order to review some items. One big piece that we are working on, and that was initiated through Senate Resolution 42 in 2020 and followed by Senate Bill 1319 in 2021, is we have convened a waste diversion and recycling task force with the goal of meeting 4 times and discussing various items related to just what it sounds like, waste diversion and recycling. Our first meeting was last fall, where we sort of broke the list of items down into sort of the relative 5 themes that you see there and sought input from the stakeholders that are on the task force, which is about 25 members, so we're a rather large group. We just recently had our second meeting with a focus on looking at bottle redemption programs as well as food waste policies that could be recommended out of the group. We're intending to have 2 more meetings with a final report due this November. Our initial report, we did have to submit something at the end of last year, but it largely summarizes the events of our first meeting. Also in the works in our waste programs is a regulated medical waste management regulations. We currently have a proposed Amendment 3 out for public comment due next month. Essentially, this regulation largely targets our regulated medical waste facilities and the management of regulated medical waste and any treatment or transfer operations in the state of Virginia. We also took some lessons learned from the Ebola outbreak several years ago and also incorporated requirements around what is often termed the Category 1 or highly infectious wastes to include that into our regulations to make them more flexible for future possible pandemics that we may have to respond to. We also have our solid waste management regulations where we have a proposed Amendment 9 also out for public comment. We're very busy in the regulations right now. This amendment largely tackles the landfill's requirements and making updates based on things that we have learned based on our compliance and permitting of landfills for the last several years. We've included some additional setbacks for landfills, making them further away from the property line, as well as other houses and schools and things of that nature at the time of permitting. As far as landfill operations, increasing our requirements around operational cover at landfills to keep our odors and fire hazards down, as well as landfill gas monitoring. We've seen an encroachment of other developments coming near our other landfills, so if there are occupied structures within 500 feet of a landfill boundary where there may be gas migration, a notification and warning to those, and also testing requirements. We've set up our groundwater monitoring to account for an eventual MCL for some of the PFAS compounds. The proposal just sort of includes the framework for that. There would be another regulatory amendment more than likely to incorporate them. We've also done some cleanup information regarding operation requirements for our other waste management facilities, so our material recovery facilities, compost facilities, transfer stations, and the like, as well as limited some of our open burning exemptions, really trying to, the variety of waste streams that we produce now, and really sort of limiting the household open burning exemption to paper and wood products and that nature. So that is all within the proposed Amendment 9, along with several other changes. Those are sort of the highlights. And like I mentioned, these are out for public comment with comments due in May. A piece of legislation that we are currently watching. Last summer, we also convened, in addition to the Waste Diversion Recycling Task Force, a fee study work group for our solid waste management facilities. We were tasked to put together this work group to come to a consensus recommendation for our solid waste fee structure to cover 100% of the direct costs of our solid waste program here in the state. At the present time, we're only covering about 40% through our annual fee program. And so we convened this work group and had several meetings, and were able to produce a set of recommendations that the General Assembly turned into Senate Bill 250. And so the schedule that's up there is sort of the proposal that was offered. The bill also includes, or the work group actually took on also making recommendations regarding our permit fee structure for solid waste facilities. And so should this bill go forward, there's also a direct action for the agency to do a regulatory amendment, which is where our permit fees are, to incorporate the recommendations of the work group as well. Another bill that the waste side of our house is interested in is a series of numbers there, but it was largely started as a waste coal pile bill, but a tack on for DEQ to host, again, another work group to evaluate opportunities for development of public infrastructure projects at current or proposed sites for storage of coal ash. We are currently working to issue permits or review applications and issue permits for our CCR, our coal combustion residual surface impoundment closures throughout the state, so this could have implications there. Moving on to what I usually just refer to as our tank program and a couple of updates. We currently moved some of our registration forms online through the DEQ's My DEQ portal. We have other forms there as well, but the tank program is new for allowing owners to make notifications if there's a new owner for an existing facility, or to make existing UST updates for the facility. We have intentions to include additional online notification forms so that multiple facilities can be updated at one time, new facilities can be registered, as well as facilitating change of ownership. We're also anticipating that this fall we will have an update to our usual and customary rates schedule for within our reimbursement manual for the tank cleanup programs that are, or for tank cleanups that occur. And then we always update the website with information regarding the fund status. If you're not aware, the fund is our reimbursement program that assists when there's releases of petroleum from eligible tanks. And so revenue comes into that fund from basically it was like a 1/5 of a cent currently fee on every gallon of fuel sold and distributed in Virginia. In July of last year, that the 1/5 of a cent came into play because the fund balance was high enough that the fee reverted to its lower amount. We're projecting out that we could be at a base where our fund hits the lower limit, which is around $3 million, where we'll need to have an increase in that fee. So we're anticipating that this summer. On to our remediation programs. Another regulatory amendment that that is in its proposed stage is an amendment for eligibility and fees for the voluntary remediation program. This amendment sort of kicked off because of sustained decreases in federal funding that the agency had been using for this program. Largely, the updates fall into the 4 categories you see here. There's currently sort of a grandfathered for sites that enrolled in the VRP prior to July of 2014. They don't pay any sort of annual fees. And we have some sites that are still just lingering in the program. So it proposes to include an annual fee assessment for those, as well as increasing the registration fees and accounting for an inflation factor adjustment. Adding a public notice requirement for amending a certificate that involves additional remedial work or changes to land use controls. That doesn't mean every amendment will require a public notice, things like changing a name or things of that nature. These are major changes that would have the public notice. And then adding some clarification language around eligibility and waiver requirements to encourage additional sites to participate in the program. Like I said, this one's out for public comment with comments due in April. Additionally, with our brownfields program, we had announced in December there was a temporary suspension of the bona fide prospective purchaser and other comfort letters. We essentially had to do that due to sort of some of the same staffing items Jutta was speaking to. We had folks that were retiring. We're just unable to keep up with the workload. The bonus there is that these are self-implementing programs and these letters weren't necessary. However, we have some good news that we're able to bring some new folks on, so hopefully we'll be able to provide those comforts regarding the liability protections that are afforded under the law. Also, 2 sort of conferences that are coming up. There's the Virginia Solar Summit that the Brownfields program is not the primary, but our staff are certainly participating and have an initiative there for encouraging the development of solar on brownfields. And planning an annual Brownfields conference in June in Southwest Virginia, and I didn't see any notice on that, so if you search for that, you're not going to find it on the internet yet, so advance warning here, or notification. And then just to end on maybe a positive note for us, throw the acronyms at you, there's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also referred to as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, but we're anticipating funding from EPA from those laws that target our land division specifically. We're anticipating some grant programs that EPA will be initiating from the Save Our Seas Act, as well as targeting consumer recycling education and outreach, but really focused on, largely in Virginia, we have municipal recycling programs, so ways to improve the infrastructure around that. Another acronym that I think is fun that they've thrown out is the SWIFR grants, is what they're calling the Save Our Seas one, which is solid waste infrastructure for recycling. EPA also received some money within this, or earmarked to, regarding battery recycling. And EPA is actually tasked with developing battery collection best practices and voluntarily labeling requirements. And then for our brownfields and Superfund, there's additional supplemental funding that can be coming into the agency or directly applied to some of our Superfund sites to help encourage and get some of these sites moving. And with that, that's all I had. I saved us lots of time, right? Next up, and last but not least, is Tiffany Sievers, our Director of Enforcement.
First, I have to say congratulations for making it this far. As a end of the alphabet kid growing up, I'll keep it short and brief, and you can ask more questions later. So one of the things that we've been working on very hard this year was an update to the enforcement manual. We updated it in its entirety with the exception of 1 chapter. So in 1 year, we managed to update chapters 2, 3, 4, and 6, and that probably doesn't mean a whole lot to you on offhand, but it's our general enforcement procedures, our entire chapter on our penalty matrix, including increases in our penalty for inflation, and a complete modification of our sections of the manual, which dealt with solid and hazardous waste, where it was a little bit more difficult to be consistent, and we've improved that. Our Chapter 6 has to do with our Administrative Process Act, which is our formal and informal hearings, and there were some significant changes there. All of those are available on Town Hall, and it was effective at the beginning of this year. Some of the upcoming goals that we have are to address Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is our supplemental environmental projects. Those are our projects that can offset up to 75% of the penalty in order to do a project that benefits the community or the environment where the areas of the impacts or violations were. One of the things we're going to focus on in that update is to look at making sure those funds are directed to the communities that were impacted and looking at how we can work and redirect money into environmental justice communities. So I'll be working with our Director of Environmental Justice, Renee Oyos, and we'll be working this year to update that. That will go to public notice when it's ready. One of the other things that we're trying to do one of Mike's goals is to look at efficiency within the enforcement program. We had piloted a program about 1.5 years ago in our tanks, where instead of it being the 20-page long enforcement order that you guys are used to seeing, or maybe some of you haven't seen them, it is now something that we can actually fill in the violations and, under 2 hours produce a document that typically takes us several months. So we are expanding that from our tanks program into our industrial stormwater and our construction stormwater programs. The industrial stormwater is complete. That was effective at the beginning of this year, and the construction stormwater, I suspect, will be ready by midsummer. And to Melanie's point with e-reporting, enforcement is on their coattails, looking at including additional information that will go directly to EPA's reporting system, which means that it will be more up-to-date and more accurate and available in their ECHO program, which is a nationwide database that's available to anybody in the public. And one of the updates that people like to ask us a lot, up until recently, FOIA was in our enforcement division, and you can see here just how increasingly important having our documentation available, accurate, and complete is. In just a few years, we've more than doubled the amount of FOIA requests. Now, this is not all state agencies. This is just DEQ. We had over 18,000 requests last year. We're already bumping up against 2,000 just since the beginning of January. And I told you I'd keep it short. So that's my presentation.
Since there's no questions, I'll follow up on Jutta's theme. We have 75 openings. This is a target-rich environment. Seriously, we have 763 employees. We need 75 more, so 10% of the population. The benefits are amazing. I mean, I'm speaking from experience now. I never knew. But but think about it, that we have several promotions and retirements that are causing promotions. So we have a lot of upward mobility, and we need lots of people. Okay? Send them our way. Sorry, buddy. So if you complain about your permit time, remember, donate an employee or two. If there's no questions, then why don't we just call it a break? And
Is there any last call for questions?
Really? No,
okay. Well, on that note, you have a little time before your next session, and have a great conference. Thank you.